surfers. We're going to get into how to read. How to read, and I know that you're thinking, how dare you? How dare you, sir? I know how to read. I'm in college, aren't I? Okay, it's not how to read. It's how to read like a professor. We could say it that way. Is that less offensive? Jeez, so so touchy. No, I want to get into how to read this stuff that your instructors assign you in college classes. Because here's the deal. Let me tell you, folks. One of the things that drove me crazy when I went from high school to college was that it's completely different. It's a totally different world, but nobody teaches you this or tells you that it's going to be different in any way. At least that wasn't my experience. Some of you, maybe you had a better experience. And I'm not even um, attacking, saying like my high school teachers or high school teachers in general. What I'm really saying is it's a different world, and we don't do a good job of transitioning our students from one world to the next one here. Yeah, maybe you haven't had this experience, but I certainly have, and most students I talk to are in this same boat where you get to college and you don't know what the hell is going on. All right. So one thing that I didn't really understand was that reading assignments that you start getting in college, like I'm giving to you in this class, they're not always obvious or easy to read or digest or whatever, in the same way that the kind of stuff I had to read in a high school class was. Like, if you think back to high school textbooks, they're pretty streamlined and straightforward. Right? That's the idea. Where they're trying to convey ideas as simply as possible to get some key facts for you so that you can then go, aha, I now know this fact. And when you're tested on that fact, you can say, here's the fact, or something along those lines, right? When you get to college, it's not quite the same deal. You're reading stuff that is trying to teach you to teach you some facts or some new ideas or whatever, but it's also designed to get you thinking more about a topic. So by the end of something that you're reading, like this Chinatown article that I'm going to be talking about, it shouldn't be a case of like, aha, now I understand everything. It's more a case of, okay, this is very interesting, but now I have this question, and what about this, or what happens if we take this idea but apply it over there? That's what you're supposed to be reading and doing and all that, but we don't tell you that at all. Okay, so I'm going to go through your first real academic reading assignment. Like we talked about Steve's book, chapter one of your main textbook. So the Steve Graves stuff, that's a kind of a classic textbook in the sense that it is similar to the high school style. Here's some facts, here's some information, a little more in depth maybe than what you would cover in a high school class covering this stuff, but still it's pretty straightforward. But your first challenging reading is Kay Anderson's article about Chinatown. And so you can access it. I have all this stuff linked. So that first page, the Thinking Geographically page, where you're finding all the lectures and this video itself and all of that, you should see in here this Anderson 1987 link. And it might be in a different place by the time you're watching this video. I realize as I'm recording this, we're well past week 2, and because some stuff took longer than I thought it would and all that, so this might show up in week 3. If it does, you'll figure it out, right? You'll be able to find that. You're college students, for crying out loud. So you'll see this link here, and if you click on the words themselves, it'll download the article. If you click on this little magnifying glass thing, it'll open up this preview so you can glance at it, get a sense of what it is. But I'm going to encourage you to download the actual PDF file itself. Don't read it here in Canvas. This is useful to get a quick, like, it's a preview. It's a way to say, like, just what is this thing that I'm looking at. So you can open this up and go, aha, there's some stuff. But in order to actually read it, I'm going to close this, download it to your actual computer. And this is another example too of why, doing this class on a phone might not be the best move. And I could be wrong. That's an old man speaking here, right? Say, you kids and your phones use an actual computer device. That's what I would do because that's what works for me. Maybe you are a phone master, and that just you work better with this tiny little screen. It seems improbable to me, but maybe. Hey, I'm not gonna force you to do anything. But at the very least, having some kind of tablet, an iPad or whatever, or better yet, some kind of Chromebook, laptop, something, right? Some actual computer. Because then you can download this thing, hold on to the actual file, open it up in some kind of PDF app, software, whatever, and you can do two things. You can print it, which is what I do with everything, but again, an old man. But I like to have a physical copy, so I can hold it, I can write stuff on it, notes in the margins, or underline things, or highlight stuff, or whatever. And I like it printed because it's easier for me. I think I move much faster with a pencil than an actual piece of paper when I'm doing this kind of work, right? You kids and your phones, you might think, oh, I don't even know what a printer is, right? We're almost to that point in society, it feels. So maybe you move faster in using using an iPad and some kind of PDF software or whatever. Look, I don't care what you do, but what you should be doing with this in this class and other classes when you're assigned stuff like that is you should be marking up the paper. And same thing, honestly, with your textbook. With Steve's stuff, do the same thing. Underline things. Put question marks next to stuff that you just don't understand, right? And then it's the kind of deal where you can, talk to your instructor. You can say, yeah, I was reading along and on page blah, 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 I get to this paragraph and I don't get what the author is saying, right? Can you help me out? Right, you can do that. Or if stuff suddenly becomes clear, you can, write in your own words, this kind of aha thing. This is what this thing is or whatever. But you should be writing all over this kind of stuff. That's the goal. Okay, so what I've done, I've downloaded this. In fact, let me go ahead and just make this big. So I downloaded the PDF, and I went ahead in here, even though I'd much rather, print it and write on it. I did some highlighting myself, and I want to go through how this is set up, and then go through just the introduction and show what it is that Anderson is doing. So you get a sense of how to read something like this, because it is an art. It's more than simply being able to, put letters together and sound them out and make words and all that. We tend to think that reading is simply I recognize the words, right? But that's not what we're doing. At the college level, reading like a professor, or reading like a good college student, if you want to think of it that way, we're actively using these words to process information, understand what the author is saying, and use this to form our own judgment or ideas or whatever, right? That's what we're going to get into. All right, so with this file, with a lot of these, you have, when you download them from something like EBSCOhost or one of these online databases, they'll have some kind of title page on there that gives you all of the important information for citing the article. So if you're going to write a paper or whatever, using this, and you had to have a proper bibliography, with MLA or APA or whatever it is your teacher is forcing you to use, This is where all of that important stuff is. It might not be in the order in which you need to write it down in your bibliography, but you got the good info here. Okay, so that's what this is. So we've got the title, the idea of Chinatown, the power of place and institutional practice in the making of a racial category. And with titles like this, in these kinds of academic papers, quite often, a lot of these, at least in terms of like geography and the kind of stuff I work in, we write titles like this. This is what I do all the time. You have like this, the idea of Chinatown. It's kind of a sexy little title there. It's interesting. It's intriguing, but it doesn't tell you anything. You have no idea what this is going to be about, right? But it sounds cool. It kind of catches your interest. And then you have the colon here, and then after that, you have some lengthy, clunky, non-sexy descriptor of what it actually is, right? And you might not, exactly know what it is just from this subtitle, but that's what we're doing. Okay, that's why we have some of these lengthy titles. And then we've got Kay Anderson is your author here, and then it's in a journal, and so this gets into peer review publishing, which I've spoken about in some of my other classes. Some of you have already heard me talk about it in the physical geography class. Some of you may have heard about it in other classes, although there's a good chance you haven't heard it spoken about because, again, we don't do a good job explaining to undergraduate students, like, what exactly is going on. But with peer review publishing, it means that an academic of some kind, a professor, a researcher, some scientist, whatever, does some kind of study, researches something, tries to understand or prove something or whatever, and then he or she or they will type up what was done and do it in this paper format that we're going to read. But that paper is submitted to one of these journals, to the editor of the journal, and the editor then, if it looks like a good deal, will send this paper out to other professors, experts, researchers, people who work in the same general field. Okay, so this one, maybe it's not people who study Chinatown specifically, but something about, it went to other human geographers, people who work with, place or, historical geographies or whatever, right? People who would understand this quite well. And then these people, these experts, they read it. They don't know who wrote it. The names are kept out of it to try to remove bias, but they would read it and offer comments and decide, is this worthy of publication? So it's getting checked, and it's more than just an editor going through and like fixing typos. It's the ideas themselves have undergone this rigorous review process with the idea that anything that's published in this form, in one of these professional peer-reviewed academic journals, it's going to be good stuff. It's going to be checked and double checked, and that's the goal. Okay, so this is different from somebody like Kay Anderson just saying, I got some thoughts about Chinatown. Yeah, I'm going to post about it, right? Like having some lengthy Instagram or Facebook or Twitter thing, or even just deciding to like have a website and have a blog or whatever. It's different from that. Okay, so that's what we're reading here, and it's from 1987. And so you could say, oh my God, like, is anything from that time even relevant today? And you'll get like some paper requirements are all about, make sure that your citations are all from the last 5 years. That's garbage. It's such a requirement. I mean, it might make sense if you're dealing with technology or medical research or something where new innovations are important. But with some of this other stuff, like this, the reason I assign this, even though it's so old, is I think it's a great paper. I think it's a good, starting point for our discussions about race in this class. And I haven't found anything else that I think is better than this published in the last 30 years ish, right? So that's why we've got this older one here. So here's all our info. And then we scroll down and we get to the second page of the PDF, which is the first page of our paper. And again, there's our title, there's our author. This is our author's affiliation, meaning the college she was at when she actually wrote that. So you can, get a sense of who this person is. And then underneath this stuff, we have the abstract. Okay, and the abstract it's a synopsis. It's a quick like greatest hits of what's going on in this paper. Okay, so you can read through here, and you're going to get a sense of every single thing that's going on in the paper. And you might look. I've been, I was a young man once. I was a student forced to read things I did not care about. And so you come across the abstract and you're like, sweet, I can read a paragraph and I'm done rather than reading the 20 pages or whatever it is. No, it doesn't work. Even though it tells you everything that's going on, it's not telling you enough to where you are then an expert on the paper. All right, the way you're going to learn about this stuff and be able to explain to me, like let's say, just saying, let's say you have a midterm for this class and you're asked a question about like what's going on with Chinatown and what Anderson says and all of that. Hint. You can't just give me the abstract here and and be good. Because look, well, you can't copy because that's going to be obvious. You're going to get a 0 on that question because you just copied and pasted. But also, even putting it in your own words, it's not going to fully make sense. And so there's stuff like here, down at the bottom here. In short, I wish to uncover the dynamic between place, racial discourse, power, and institutional practice by way of contributing to the recent rediscovery of place in human geography. Now, let's just say right off the bat that you understood every single word in there. There are going to be some like racial discourse, institutional practice. Those are pretty academic words, even though they're not totally crazy words. You can kind of piece them together. There's a lot in those words. But let's just say you understand everything there. If I say you put that into your own words and really explain it, you're not going to be able to do it. Right? Or it's going to be obvious you're not going to be able to do it because the real details, the stuff that really explains what's going on, it's in the rest of the paper. All right. So the whole point of the abstract, it's for people doing research, whether it's students having to write a paper, whether it's professors trying to write a paper, whatever. We're searching through these library databases and we put in keywords and stuff pops up. And so if I'm doing something on Chinatown and this article pops up, I can look at this abstract and see, is this connected to what it is I'm trying to do, or is it something totally different, right? Am I interested in, say, race as it pertains to Chinatown itself, or am I doing something like, fun things to do in Chinatown, or I don't know, whatever, something that doesn't work, right? I will quickly know, oh yeah, I should read this article, or no, this article isn't going to help me, and I move on. That's the purpose of it. So it's not a way to make life easier for students. It's to make your research a little more streamlined. Okay, so do read through this, but then start reading the actual paper. All right. Okay. Now, as I said, this is a classic academic paper. It's written in a specific style, in a specific way. The introduction, it's going to be key. And the introduction doesn't necessarily, like this one, it doesn't say introduction. We don't always label this stuff, mainly because it feels lame to do that. But you might see in an article, introduction, or maybe you don't. All right? But it's going to be that first section in here. And reading that introduction is going to be key, assuming the author did his, her, their job properly. They're going to be setting up what it is they're up to. What's their plan? What are they trying to say and demonstrate and prove and all of that? So a real key thing is to read slowly through the introduction. And I say slowly meaning that you want to get in here and actually, make sure you get what's going on. And this is where you're going to be underlining and writing little notes and stuff like that. So I went in and I did some underlining in the, or highlighting here in the introduction to point this out. And I've got little notes and so on. So you've got this quote, right, in the first place. You can see the date in here, 1902. So this is a bit of historical evidence, a primary source that Anderson is throwing out there right off the bat. Okay, so I'd read that. And then I get down here, and Anderson starts writing, "It would be easy to interpret the words of Royal Commissioners Clute, Munn, and Foley in 1902 as further evidence, if more were needed, of the weight of racial discrimination in British Columbia during the stern years of the late 19th and early 20th centuries." There's a lot going on in here. Right off that, you catch it? Do you see what Anderson's doing? Do you see what she's doing right there? Brilliant. Brilliant. You don't see it? All right. So here's the deal. All right. It would be easy. Those first 4 words, that's a big, big thing. She's saying, yeah, if you're a dummy, this is what you're going to do. But I ain't no dummy, right? That's what Kay Anderson is saying right here. So my note, everyone else is wrong. That's what she's saying here. She is saying right off the bat, anybody who, is reading this stuff, who's studying racial discrimination in British Columbia during this period of time, what the chumps are going to do is they're going to say, oh man, everybody was racist. But Anderson's not doing that, right? And so this is pretty, right off the bat, this is fantastic. And this is why I like this article, apart from what she's actually saying about Chinatown in this specific place at a specific time and all that. She's also, there's, she's being tough, but in a polite way. Like, she's not flat out saying like, everyone's a moron except me. She's not saying that, but she's kind of saying that, right? And that's what we should be doing when we're writing anything. So whether you're a first or second year student in a community college class at ABC, right? Or you're a professor who's been researching and writing for 20 years, like, it doesn't matter where you are. If you're writing something within academia, so either for a class or for publication or whatever, you should be trying to say something new and interesting. And really what that means is you're saying, yeah, these other people, they didn't get it. They missed something, right? You don't have to be a jerk about it. You don't have to say, like, everyone's dumb. Although sometimes you need to say that. Sometimes you need to say, hey, look, stop it. Just stop. This is not working. Listen to me. I know what's going on, right? That's pretty cool. That's the equivalent of, like, you're watching some kind of sporting event, and an athlete just, it kind of has that look or whatever. Like in the NBA, that's always a fantastic. Like James Harden has that. There's that thing online, the clip of where he just, like, knocks over a guy and, like, glares back at it. Like, it's just, that's awesome, right? If you like that particular player, and if you don't, you hate the guy, and you're like, oh, this is why I don't like your team. But that's what we're doing right here, right? This is tough stuff here. All right. So she's saying, a lot of people, a lot of dummies would say, oh, look, white folks were racist back in the day. That's the easy way out, right? And this claim, the Chinese, because of their distinctiveness, right? She's also pointing out that, like, what it is because the Chinese are so clearly different from the white folks, that makes the white folks racist toward the Chinese, or they're able to be racist because there's an obvious difference in there. Okay, and that's kind of what she's saying in there. And then you continue to read through, and she gets into, with this introduction, you're going to start to see, you're pointing out that, look, I've done the reading. I've seen what other people have had to say, right? So this Chinatown serve as commentaries on the attitudes and behavior of their host societies, e.g., you've got Barth and Lyman and Palmer and Price and all these different things. These are other people who have written about this stuff. And she's effectively, and you see more down here. And effectively, what she's saying is that all these folks, I mean, yeah, they've done some good work and so on, but I'm not buying it. Right? We're gonna do something different. So she's kind of setting it up. This is what's come before. I'm just gonna get into here's what I'm gonna do. Okay? So keep reading through, and you should be reading all of this to really see how it works. But down here it says, it is possible, however, to adopt a different point of departure to the study of Chinatown. So what she's saying here is like, yeah, again, you could just do all this racist stuff, white folks are racist and against the clearly different Chinese, or what if we do something else? What if we think about this in a different way? All right, and so I have here hypothesis. Okay, and we use hypothesis like in a physical science class, a physical geography, or even life sciences, or what. Hypothesis we always use for these real, science stuff that you're going to predict, and then you'll test and experiment and so on. But we can use a hypothesis in the social sciences and the humanities and all that. She's simply saying, like, what if we do this? Let's test this other thing. So she's not flat out saying, this is exactly how it is, right? This is already proven or whatever. She's saying, let's try this. Check this out. Let's see what happens here, right? So that's why I put hypothesis in here. That's my note. And that's a really good thing to have. This is what she's saying she's going to be doing, right? This is kind of like the idea of, here's my new idea. And this is what makes this paper different from other papers. And, you can think of it as a student. This is why my instructor forced me to read it, right? Because of what Anderson is doing here, right? That's what I'm doing in assigning it, is to get you guys thinking differently about this, hopefully. And one reason I assign this one is because when I was a baby geographer and forced to read stuff, this is one that I read and went, huh, son of a gun. And even the first time I read it, like, I didn't fully get it. And that's another thing you need to be aware of as an academic, whether as a student or a graduate, a professor, whatever. You need to realize there's a lot of stuff. Like, I read it was like on the third time I read it that I finally go, duh, okay, yeah, this is what the author is actually saying. This is what's brilliant about it. I missed it the first two times, and that might sound awful and depressing for you, but that's just part of college. That's just part of this, of research, of learning, of being an intellectual, like whatever you want to look at here. Okay, and then other people might say, like, why is this so hard? Shouldn't it be like, can't we just have some bullet points and call it good? No, it doesn't quite work the same way. Part of this process is reading through. Now, you get some people who are like, it seems like they're purposefully being difficult to read, and they use words that just not good, and they make it purposely hard for students and basically people who are not them, and those people are dicks. But any bit of academic writing like this, it's going to be challenging just because that's part of the process in laying out your argument and getting people to also understand it. Like the way in which we learn, it's through this struggle. It's through making our brains work. All right? And once you're willing to do that, it's going to be so much easier than when you resist this stuff. All right? So let's get back to this hypothesis. So it's possible, however, that's our clue to like, whoa, slow down. Something's changing right here. To adopt a different point of departure to the study of Chinatown, one that does not rely upon a discrete Chineseness. You notice the little quotes right there. So a discrete Chineseness as an implicit explanatory principle, meaning that, like, let's study Chinatown, but let's not look at it as these Chinese immigrants as simply being Chinese, right? As simply being like just naturally Chinese. This gets back to what I've been talking about with hegemony and Gramsci and the idea of things being made natural or common sense, let's question just the naturalness of the statement that Chinese people are different from white folk, from Anglo Americans or Anglo Canadians, right? The Canadians in this case, because we're dealing with Canada, with Vancouver and British Columbia, but the white folks there who came from, British ancestry or Irish or German, whatever, take your pick of the white folk that came into this area. Okay? Um, so rather than going along with that, let's question it, right? Chinatown, again, in these quotes, is not Chinatown only because the Chinese, whether by choice or constraint, live there. Okay, so it's, and again, she gets, I kind of skipped through it, but it's the idea, right? Like up here, we see Chinatown in North America is characterized by a concentration of Chinese people and economic activities. Basically saying Chinatown in any city, we've got one in San Francisco and LA, and these ones up in Canada, and all over. When you see a Chinatown, that's where the Chinese people live, right? And so some people, and this is what I thought about Chinatown before I studied this, like as a kid when I first heard about it. First saw San Francisco's Chinatown. I was like, oh, this is where the Chinese people who came over here, they hung out with other Chinese people, and they decided like, hey, let's bring a little bit of home over here, right? Let's be all Chinesey over here, right? And then later you go, oh no, they're there because the white people were racist, and that's what made Chinatown. And she's saying no, right? Chinatown is not Chinatown only because the Chinese, whether by choice, right, or constraint, meaning racism, live there, right? Rather, one might argue, and that's it. That's that hypothesis language. She's not saying here's how it is. She's saying like, what if we think of this, right? Rather, one might argue that Chinatown is a social construction, right? I don't know if we've talked about this in here yet or not, but social construction meaning people made it up. It's not natural. It's not something that was found out in nature, has a basis in nature. It's not something that a divine being, a god of any denomination, set forth and made this way, or it's not the result of, chemical reactions in nature or anything like that. Social construction means people made it up. Okay? So one might argue that Chinatown is a social construction with a cultural history and a tradition of imagery and institutional practice that has given it a cognitive and material reality in and for the West. There's a lot going on in here, and this is one of these things you might have to read a few times, and you might have to slow down and go, okay, what is going on? So we know social construction, people made it up, and it's got this cultural history, meaning we can go back. This gets back into materialism, which I talked about before. Where we can go back in history and we can find key moments where Chinatown came into being, right? And that might sound obvious, but again, it counteracts this idea of it's natural. That the idea of being Chinese, in the sense that Americans or Canadians, in this case, think about it, that's not natural. All right, that's something people made up at a certain point in time. And this tradition of imagery and institutional practice, the imagery you're going to see, she's going to either write about stuff like ideas of what it is to be Chinese, or you'll actually see cartoons and things that were in newspapers at the time. Okay, so you see actual images, and then institutional practice, meaning laws, right? The way the actual government worked. In this case, in Vancouver, right? So it's made up and there's a history, but here's the deal. There are these ideas that have been, thrown out there, but the way in which these ideas have been used and produced and reproduced and so on, it's given it a cognitive reality, meaning it's something we think of as natural. Common sense. It's in our brains. It's an idea that we don't go like, that's silly. It's an idea where people go, yep, that's how Chinese people are. right? Or, you like if you're racist, you would go like, yeah, that's how them Chinese are. Or what Anderson's getting at here is even if you're not racist, if you're like, look, hey, yeah, the Chinese are different, but I'm cool with that, man, because I don't see color, whatever. Um, it's still what you're doing is you're still, you know, reproducing and maybe even reifying this idea of of Chinese as an actual discrete category. When the reality, what you're reproducing, it's this racial idea that really doesn't need to be there at all. Okay, so even if you say, I'm not racist, I don't care about racism, that kind of stuff, or like everybody's cool with me, we still accept some of these racial ideas, even if we don't realize it. Okay, that's what she's getting at. And then material reality means material meaning like actual stuff that you can touch, the buildings themselves. The fact that we have an actual Chinatown in a lot of cities, around. And when she says the West here, it doesn't mean like the Western United States. It's not like Utah, Nevada, and California and all that. She's saying the West as opposed to the East, as opposed to Asia, right? West meaning, Europe, Britain, the French, and the U.S. and Canada. Okay, which even those like West and East, that's a very socially constructed idea too. But she's using that as kind of shorthand in here, right? You can see how difficult it can be as we start to pick at some of the history of these social constructions. There's a lot in there that we've made up. Okay? But what she's really saying is this whole idea. It's not even a case of that, yeah, people were racist and isn't that a shame? It's a case of like this whole notion of what it is to be Chinese is bullshit. And I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Let's just go from that idea and we'll see what happens. Okay, so that's the idea. As we keep going down, okay, it says it is not possible to investigate in one brief article the process of the classification of identity and place. Blah, 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 blah. What this is my little note, scope of study. She's saying, look, this is a short paper. I'm not going to do everything. You might still have questions. And when you do something like this, you're anticipating questions that people might have, and you're saying, it's not that I didn't think about that, it's that I don't have time to do it right now, right? Maybe I'll do it in another paper. Maybe this is part of a bigger book idea that I have where I'll deal with this stuff. But right here, you're saying, oh, look, I get you. I hear you. But here's what I'm trying to do. Okay, so these are important too to see. But I have you guys in this class writing these discussion questions in here. It is not possible. The whole idea of the discussion questions, I want you to prove that you've read through the article in question or articles, depending on what it is. But also, think about some stuff that she's not talking about. And this, could help you think about what is she not talking about. And that doesn't mean that for your discussion question, like don't write, man, what would it be like if we investigated in the process of the classification of identity and place in the numerous contexts where the race idea has been institutionalized? No, put it in your own words, right? Don't do that because you're gonna get a zero because you're just copying and you're a monster. All right, but that's what that is. And so then this rather my aim here, we're gonna get more into the hypothesis in here, right? My aim here is to argue the case for a new conceptualization of Chinatown as a white European idea with reference to one context out of Vancouver, British Columbia. Okay? So it's the idea that, look, the Chinese didn't come here to, in this case, British Columbia, but to, the Americas in general. They didn't come here, these immigrants, back in the 19th century, early 20th century, they didn't come here and say, like, look, we're Chinese, let's hang out together. Okay, she's saying no. But also this idea of they had to do this because of, everybody was racist, so they made the Chinese people just kind of stayed there to be safe or whatever. No, it wasn't that either. It's that this whole notion of Chinatown, white folks did it. white folks did it. The Chinese, they didn't want this, but the white folks did it and kind of made it like a natural seeming thing. So even if we're trying not to be racist now, we say like, they were so racist and that's a shame. But that's why the Chinese decided to live together. She's saying everything is all white folks, right? From day one. All right, so that's what she's getting into here. And then we continue. The power of definition. I highlighted that because I think it's quite useful to think about as you're going through here. Who has the power to define, right? Who actually defined this concept of Chinatown? And she's arguing it's not the Chinese. They didn't have the power. It's the white folks, right? It's the white folks in a place like Vancouver had the power that allowed them to say Chinese people are a certain way, and therefore they're going to live over here. We're going to call it Chinatown and all of that stuff. That the actual Chinese immigrants themselves had no power, no agency. They weren't able to do this. Okay? And again, this idea of an idea with remarkable social force and material effect. Let's pull this up. Let me pull it up here. It's this idea that simple ideas aren't just ideas, right? And we tend to have this, like with race in general, we tend to say, hey, racism's an idea and it's unfortunate, but let's just shut off this idea. Well, let's come up with a new idea. Let's say like, hey, racism's not cool. And then we kind of, and I say we, like that's what we white people do quite often. Bless our hearts, by the way. Any of you white folks listen to this, bless your hearts. This is a safe space for you. We try. We don't get it quite often. In the sense that, that was me growing up before I really started studying this stuff. Like, what's the deal with race? Race is not a good thing. Let's stop being racist. Hey, I don't see color. That kind of stuff. But what we fail to get is that it's already, because of these ideas, they've already made real things exist out there in the world. And you hear terms like systemic racism or institutional racism and stuff like that. It's that the ideas have left our minds and they are real things, material things. Doesn't matter how you feel about this stuff, there are real racist obstacles for people. Even if all the white folks in this exact area are like, I don't see color, doesn't matter because it's been made real. Okay, that's what she's getting in here. And again, it's good to point out, talking about how old this thing is, in 1987. We've been dealing with this for a long time. It might feel like here in 2020, as I'm recording this, that like we're finally getting to the point where we're saying, hey, this racism thing is not cool. No, people have been fighting this forever. And Anderson's not the first person to do this. But it's a case of it's not working. Clearly, like there's more work we got to do. All right. But this at least is a good entry into the idea that race is a real thing, even if we say the idea doesn't make any logical sense, right? Even if we can say biologically it's not real, race has been made real by culture, by social relationships and things like that, all right? And then finally, at the bottom of this introduction, also read through all of this stuff. Don't skip it, but I'm pointing out some just key passages. So I thereby attempt to uncover the broader relationship between place, power, racial discourse, and institutional practice. You remember that from the abstract. Just getting into a little more detail in this introduction. Maybe it makes more sense now, maybe not. Maybe you got to keep reading through, right? She said, I'm trying to do all this stuff in one British settler society. Okay? And such an interpretation of Chinatown might be equally relevant to the making of other racial categories in Vancouver, to Chinese and Chinatowns in other settings, and to other racially defined people in other settings. So she's saying in here, my note is, okay, well, this is why we should care, right? This is why this is important. Maybe I will never, ever go into a Chinatown, whether it's Vancouver's or not. Why should I care about this stuff? Or I'm not going to write a paper on Chinatown, so why should I use this particular article as one of my sources, right? So what I'm doing here with this is, or what she's doing here is saying like, look, if you want to understand racism and place and how this idea has been made real and all that, well, that's what I'm trying to do, right? What I'm attempting to do, and she's using might, she's got the languages there. She's not saying this isn't the best way to do it, but here's what I'm throwing out. Here's my idea. This is my hypothesis, right? Let's play around with this idea. She's saying, look, let's look at how race has been made, gone from an idea to real, and how it's this historical process. And yeah, let's see this here in Chinatown, but then maybe let's apply it to other places. See if this makes more sense in the broader sense of these racial studies. And then this final paragraph, I begin by providing a brief outline of the geographical side of the subject of this paper. Following that sketch, I discuss the conceptualization of Chinatown as a Western landscape type and then present empirical material from the Vancouver example. So what this is, in my note, this is the outline of the paper, right? So what she's saying in here is like, look, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to explain what's going on with Vancouver, right? That's what that sketch is about, just like Chinatown itself and all that. And then I'm going to get into this idea of how, Chinatown, it's a Western idea, it's a Western landscape and all that. And then I'm going to give you this empirical material. I'm going to give you the evidence right here. I'm not only going to just come up with this idea, I'm going to point. I'm going to say, look at this, and look at this, and this, and this. So she's going to use these primary sources, right, things from the actual moments in time in which she's working, as evidence for this hypothesis, to work to prove it. All right, and that's where I stopped highlighting. As you go through, you're going to get this stuff. We're going to have, a map in here. You're going to read more stuff through here. You're going to see we got cartoons at some point. Yeah, this is a good. I'll talk about this one like in class or in the lecture when I talk about this a little more. I just love the symbolism in this kind of stuff. But this again is that primary source. This was in a newspaper or whatever publication at the time, right, from 1907, right? So that's what she is dealing with. And you continue, more cartoons, and you go through, and then the conclusion. It's going to tell you what she did, right? But again, if you just read the introduction and the conclusion, you might have a good idea of what she's doing. But honestly, it's a lot easier if you just read the whole thing. And I'm not going to test you on what exactly happened March 22nd, 1920. I'm not going to do that at all. I'm not going to look for specific details. So you can, read through here. You don't have to take notes on every single thing. But what I want to get from you guys is, what's that bigger idea? How is it that Chinatown is this Western concept, this definition by the white folks, right, who had the power? Like, what is she saying? And also, do you agree with it? You might read through all this and you go like, nope, I don't buy it at all. And that's perfectly fine, right? If you don't, but you be prepared too. Don't just say like, I don't get it, I don't like it. You got to say like, no, I would counter, if you want to sound really academic, here is why I don't agree with Anderson's take on this. What about this? Or she shows this evidence, but what if we read the evidence this way? Or whatever. Perfectly fine. Everything I give to you in this class to read, you don't have to agree with it. It's not necessarily the best way to think about stuff or the only way to think about stuff. It's usually I'm giving you things that I think are good or at least worthy of reading because it can prompt other ideas. But feel free. If you don't dig it, tell me why. Right? Explain it. Argue your point, and be academic about it. All right. And then you've got the acknowledgments. This is where you say like, thanks to people who helped me put this together, and all that. Notes, you'll see a little endnotes reference in there, and then you've got your actual bibliography itself, the sources that she used to craft this paper. All right, so that's it. This is our Chinatown paper. Hopefully, having listened to me ramble on about this stuff, it's going to make a little more sense or be a little easier to get through. So that also, when you're forced to read yet another one of these things, you'll know what to do. You'll know what to look for. You'll know what these different components are, and it'll be a little easier for you to make sense of it. All right, geographers, happy reading. Also, keep in mind, if you don't read this thing fully, it means you're racist. All right, and that's pretty much all the readings I'm making you do because so many of them have to deal with race. You don't read it, that's fine, but you're racist, and sorry, I don't make the rules. That's just your choice. All right, happy reading. Have a lovely day. Talk to you when I talk to you.